As Peter Drucker says, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence. It is to act with yesterday's logic. Welcome back, listeners, to the BizBlend Podcast. I'm Sana, your host as always, and today's episode, this is for all the leaders, the future leaders, and honestly, anyone who has been voluntold to lead a project with zero authority and 100% accountability. And let me tell you, listeners, my guest has lived the leadership chaos from both sides. Boston startups, Fortune 5 companies, the whole spectrum of move fast to move carefully and submit the form in triplicate. A few months ago, he asked a deceptively simple question: what are the greatest leadership challenges of today? Not theory, not conference slogans, not fluff, but the real stuff. The question, that question turned into 150 plus deep interviews across industries. Basically, one of the biggest qualitative snapshots of leadership pain points right now. He found five leadership crises, leaders feeling underprepared, overwhelmed, uncertain about AI disruption, shaky on identity, and trapped in an accountability vacuum where old influence tactics don't land anymore. And now he's running Human Ignition, turning those insights into practical leadership frameworks and programs, and also writing a book to take this research wider. So, if you are thinking, if you are wondering, is it just me or is leadership getting harder? It's not just you. Let's get into it. And listeners, please welcome my incredible guest, Edward Boudrot. Edward, welcome to BizBlend, and it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you, Sana. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super, super. So, Edward, let's begin with first understanding kind of the journey before you even started to get on to the research and then interviewing 150 plus leaders. I mean, that is amazing to start with. But then you have led in three Boston startups and then two Fortune 5 companies. Um, when did you personally realize the old leadership playbook stopped working in real time?
So I was lucky enough to be a part of the three startups, but also enterprises as well. And I'd say in each one of those cases, I was the right hand person to the leader. And I'd hear things like, why did the board meeting go sideways? Or after a big presentation to an all hands within a company, how come no one had questions for me? So I really saw the struggles of leadership, and I love leadership. I'm passionate about it. I read over 100 books a year, mainly on leadership. So I felt like there was a missing ingredient to really helping guide leaders, and that's what really inspired the research. Is I want to know the current state, of leadership, what the challenges are, but also I think even more importantly for me, what are the antidotes to the challenges?
Hmm. Hmm. And that is actually kind of a very tough spot to be in, because then you get into this rabbit hole of thoughts and kind of contemplating that, is it something wrong with me or my style of leadership or my team members, my employees, they don't like me. So it's quite a tough spot to be in there. And thank you so much, Edward, for sharing that. And when it hit you, what exactly you did you start to kind of analyze it with yourself, or go out to experts or mentors or guides? What exactly, what was the first step that you took?
So the first step is I started to talk to, you know, leaders and, some of the world leaders. In fact, I talked to a leader that was a founder of JP Morgan, for example, and just super interesting. I'd ask them the question, what is the greatest leadership challenges of today? And just got fascinating, answers. So the more I kind of dug into it, to your point, the more fascinated I got and really wanted to architect. If you looked at my whiteboard right now, I have the theory of 100. So my goal started to be, as I started to learn more, I wanted to get to 100 interviews. Clearly, I surpassed that pretty quickly. But I think it's
Mm,
just a fascination of, the world today, leadership today. And you said it earlier, and how challenging leadership is. And, y- do I need new tools to be a leader in today's world?
mm, mm. No, and that's a very valid question. Um, so if you had to name, Edward, the first skill leaders need when all the playbooks or the conventional approaches out there, frameworks and all, not or whatnot. What is it decision making speed? Is it emotional regulation? What exactly is the first skill leaders need?
So I love the question. I actually call it the leadership paradox. As
Okay.
you as you pointed out earlier, even in my early career in the startups or Fortune 5 companies, I had ambition. I had the confidence to pull it off as a leader. I was very decisive. But I think that's the old world in terms of, if you think about a playbook, the new playbook or traits we need as leaders is humility. Um, we need the ability to listen almost as a CIA agent would, that deep understanding of, what's being communicated, and then vulnerability. So I really think, what got us here now, um, is in our way as leaders, and we need that new playbook. So I believe that's the leadership paradox that we're in now, is leaders really need to shift, who they are and how they operate. And to your earlier point, that's my kind of internal operating system. And, how do I think about myself as a leader with, to your point, the emotional regulation, but also the listening to others and adapting as fast as possible.
Hmm. Interesting. Hey, listeners, before we move on to the next part of the conversation here on BizBlend, I would just like all of you, if you aren't, or if you are finding this conversation interesting, do show your love by subscribing to us. Hit the follow button and share this episode with your friends, your loved ones, your colleagues. And yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about you know one of your, I mean, five crises. Um, it is underprepared for the role, and why I am asking this, because um it's kind of a coincidence, Edward, but recently I have had so many conversations with some incredible guests, discussing about managers, leaders, especially, like, there's this um there is a by default criteria that an individual contributor, top performing, high achieving in the entire team, and they are the ones who are, put into the people manager roles or leadership roles. But sometimes they they absolutely have no idea, because being responsible just for your own deliverables, and then when you are given that responsibility of actually leading humans, leading people, they are very much different. They're very much different roles. So, one of your five crises is leaders being unprepared for the role. So, do you think, are we promoting the wrong people, or are we setting good people up but with bad systems?
Yeah, I love the latter comment. Um, Clearly, they're really good and capable people, but they don't have the systems, to your point, in place. And, one of the things that I heard through the research that I've done is the more you rise within an organization, the less support you have. But that goes to your exact point around the right systems in place. In fact, I talked to a senior vice president, and she said it's the loneliest position in the world because I no longer have, the mentorship or the appropriate training, at hand. And now I'm essentially competing with, my senior leadership team, and I'm expected to know what I'm doing. So I think all of that leads to exactly what you're suggesting around a system. And the way I think about, your example specifically is, you have that high achieving, individual contributor that's rising and recognized. And they might be missing what I call the team operating system. And this is one of the antidotes that I really think about. And an example that I use there that I've done in the past is leverage radical candor. But what that does is really give a language for me as a leader, but also those around me on the team. So we can actually, with deep empathy, be very direct with someone and, understand the situation, but also coach at a high level. So that's just one example of what I call the team operating system. That would be the system that you actually referred to that really enables success of that individual contributor. And they can actually rise into that leadership role or team leadership role. So you're exactly right. The systems are missing now.
I mean, personally for me, to some extent, it's really actually shocking, Edward. It's really actually shocking, and I I wish, like, so I mean, we are basically taking someone great at execution, but then tossing them into human complexity with zero instruction manual, and then acting shocked when it gets messy. I mean, that is wild. That is wild.
Yeah, and
Um,
one of the other aspects that I think about, and you're right, it's almost like no one teaches you these things or that the systems are not in place. But I think one of the most important things as if you are that individual contributor or you're starting to lead a team is deciding with the team how you want to operate. And I call that team principles. And, I use the example of radical candor before, but that might be one of the principles of the team is we care deeply about one another, but we're going to be very direct so we can, elevate. And then, another team principle might be we're going to be the learning organization. But these principles actually set the tone and tonality of where a team can grow and be. So that's, another example of, a system that could be put in place. But is that taught, to your point? I think the answer is probably not, but it's one of the most important things.
hmm, makes sense. Makes sense. Now, Edward, I would like to, kind of give this entire stage to you. Like uh, you realized traditional leadership is breaking down. You identified five distinct crises hitting leaders today. So, if you can give us, get us familiar with these major five crises, like, if you can, yeah, share with us.
Yeah, definitely. So, clearly the leadership paradox is, one of those things in terms of, how are you operating today? And how do you actually need to operate in the future to be adaptive, within your environment? And, that's one of the important, crises that we're in. And also loneliness is another crisis that we're in terms of, as you rise within the organization, um, you know, I call it the 360-degree surround of a leader. And that's, who are your mentors? Who is your board of directors? Who do you get inside advice from? Who do you get outside, advice from? And that actually starts to get you in a position, even if you are that individual contributor, in a spot where you can identify, maybe it's unknown to you, but can be, known through relationships or find someone who has, been there before. So that's what I call the 360-degree surround for a, for a leader. And to your point, it could be early stage leader or late stage leader.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the other areas is that, you know, AI was mentioned, in the 150 interviews 325 times. They actually took account. And I call it, AI is an existential problem, not a technical problem. And what I mean, what I heard from leaders, I call them enlightened leaders in a way, is they said with the, you know, um, development of AI, clearly it's impacting, all of us, but we need to become more human in that, and that connections, matter, personal relationships matter. And I think that's another foundation, of what I saw in the interviews. And it's funny, I talked to a marketing person, and she said, "Hey, I'm really struggling. I'm asked to, reduce my staff and leverage AI, but I don't actually know what to do with it." And it's funny, a later conversation I had with an AI scientist, actually, I posed that problem to him and I said, "What would you do?" And he said, "Nothing is different. You need to identify, what you're solving for, what applied, technology will solve, and then run experiments to see if it actually worked." I just thought that was fascinating to think about. So the conversations in AI were multidimensional. And then I'd say lastly, and you mentioned this, is the operating system. How do we think about that as a leader? So I really break it down in really, key areas, which is, the internal operating system. Um, and I actually heard a lot in my interviews, fear is a driver. Um, and how do you, recognize that fear? And then, I call it pausing and shifting. Below the line is fear, anger, all the things that you would imagine. Above the line is, joy and gratefulness and curiosity. But as a leader, your internal operating system, how do you recognize where you are? Are you being reactive or are you being creative? And then we talked about the team operating system a little bit with that, potentially new leader, or, how are you deciding to, operate, as a team with things like radical candor or, principles put in place. And then there's another aspect I think about is enterprise operating system, which is what I heard from leaders is that we're only operating in horizon 1 and we can't get to horizon 2 or horizon 3. And we know our lunch is going to be eaten by, early stage, startups. But how are you deciding to invest from an enterprise perspective, and what's that operating system to get you to, that success point you want to be? And then lastly, for me, and I think the most important is world operating system. How are you deciding to operate in the world, but also create value as well? So those are really the aspects I think about when, I think about the crisis we're in, leadership, but also, what I heard from leaders.
Mm. Yeah, this is actually very interesting. Very interesting, Edward. Um, Another very interesting, kind of now, um, when I think somewhere down the line, in fact, even I would also say that I have really missed touching upon is we do talk about um, leadership skills, how a good leader is supposed to be. We talk about the importance of emotional intelligence, or to begin with, inner work, or uh, it first starts at the individual level and then it kind of precipitates down to your team members. Something which comes a lot of times is the accountability part. Um, and that's where my question here is, Edward. I mean, you mentioned, you described an accountability vacuum here where old influence tactics don't work. But then some people would say that with dashboards, um, visibility, public metrics, leaders are definitely drowning in accountability. So which is it? I mean, like some people would argue the complete opposite here. So what's your thought on this?
Yeah, so one of the and I'll come to the accountability part, is
Mm,
people when I one of the it's a big theme in the interviews was there's a generational communication gap.
okay.
So and it was fascinating to really, drill into that. And, you know, what I heard from folks, in uh, later or latter generations was I need to know the why of what we're doing before I'm fully engaged. And, what I heard from, earlier folks, earlier generations was they just don't get it. They don't, have the same mindset, as we do. And the
Mm,
gap is understanding, why something, is looking to be achieved, and having that level of communication. And that's where the accountability actually breaks down. Because if I don't know the why of why I'm doing something, I'm going to put, you know, potentially less effort into that, or have less loyalty to a company. But if I, as a leader, if I'm constantly communicating, the why, what, and how we're doing things, and it's fully understood, then I have a fully engaged workforce, right? So I saw less of it of a generational gap than our ability to adapt as leaders, communicate effectively. And,
mm,
there's also this concept that I've seen in, enterprises, which is called the frozen middle. So as a leader, you're looking ahead, you're, understanding what futures there are, what the strategy is. But
mm.
as you go down in the organization, that gets lost.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
that becomes our job as leaders, is to communicate effectively, hold folks accountable, and then the dashboards will turn all green, so to speak, to your earlier point. So that's where I think the breakdown is, and how, how we can change that as leaders.
Hmm. And I really feel that this distinction, it is, I mean, accurate, and it's spicy, because we have got performance theater but not responsibility clarity. I mean, it's like, everyone's accountable until it's time to make the hard call.
I I love that. Yeah, yeah, and I love the, idea of, presentation theater, because one of the leaders I talked to was a quote that they had, which was, "The real conversation starts when the presentation ends," right? And that to me is presentation theater, and, goes back to a lot of the things that we talked about. Create those deep human connections, right? Understand the deep why of something's, why something is, looking to be achieved. Make sure you communicate that why, and then all of a sudden you become that, you know, clear, strategy and execution engine that you have the whole organization aligned around.
Hmm. Hmm. And something that you mentioned, and I think this was, um I haven't had, uh you know anyone else kind of, explicitly talk about this, is um the the underlying fact that, there can be generational um differences between the thought processes or the belief systems that, leaders can have, especially for someone, um from the younger generations, recently put into the leadership position. I mean, that can be a very, very challenging. But yes, there are definitely, I'm not just saying or dismissing that there are, um, you know, solutions available out there. There are ways to navigate that. But I do believe, considering myself as well in that position, that it can be a really, really challenging place to be in.
The interesting thing that I've asked, folks that have worked for me before, when they started to, work for me, or I became a new leader, I would just simply ask the question to someone, "What do you love?" the answer could vary. It could be, "Hey, I want to be on the promotion track," or, "It's really important for me to, have that raise," or someone could say, "My family's important to me," and that would allow adaptability no matter what level of generation, that person was. I would cater in a way to what they were looking, to achieve or what they loved and help them get that. Um,
Mm.
in one of the cases, I had a kind of, worked with an employee for 10 years. They left the company and became a CEO, and that's what they
Mm.
were after, and I knew that. And there's a quote that I, used to say to folks. I'm sure I'm paraphrasing someone else, but, you know, I want and this was to an employee, "I want you to be so damn good you can go do whatever you want, but I wanna
Mm.
be so damn good that you don't leave." So that was always my promise with the folks that work to me, and I think it helps cross that chasm of generation, and it's just about caring for humans.
Yeah, that's a really good one, Edward. Really good one. You mentioned about the AI disruption part, when you were explaining about the crisis here. Uh, Now, it may not be with all the companies that we are seeing out there, but then there is this fear, especially of the middle management kind of, getting replaced by AI, or maybe companies restructuring and middle managers or you know uh, leaders who are directly managing teams getting kind of out of that equation. What's one AI related decision leaders are making badly right now, and what's a better way to approach it, without falling into this hype or fear?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say, you know, a mistake would be, how do we replace humans with AI? That's actually the kind of worst thing I think, we could think about, but it's how do we think about, AI as a technology to augment, us as humans so we can achieve the objectives that we're looking to achieve. And a great example for me is, within healthcare, how can we actually think about, AI improving the lives of humans? And that's what we should be thinking about is what are those big problems that we can solve for humans that can, get us there faster, that can make people's lives better. So I think that would be the contrast, right? Of, how do we replace humans versus how do we make someone's life better, inclusive of, middle management or however we want to think about that.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. But I'm very sure our listeners, especially founders, leaders, they would be so curious to explore what further you got to know from all the interviews that you did with 150 plus leaders and the more work that you're doing and your book as well. So to make that easier for you, can you tell our listeners how they can reach out to you and get a hold of all the work that you're doing?
Sure, I think the easiest way is through LinkedIn, and it's just Edward Boudreau. So I'd love to connect and let me know how I can help you. I'd love to even have a conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, listeners, there you go. I'll have all the links and details in the show notes. And you can just refer to them along with this episode on whichever platform you are listening to this podcast to. And if you're thinking, like, wow, I'm not failing, the environment is changing. You're not alone, because that is something I am also thinking after listening to Edward. And you're not crazy. Leadership is evolving and it's doing it loudly. Um, Edward, what I love about your approach that it is it is grounded in evidence and real grounded leader stories, not vibes, not generic advice. So thank you so much. Thanks for bringing the real facts and the real evidences here, because yeah, there's a lot of noise out there, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Sana. Appreciate you.
So, to everyone listening, if this episode hit a nerve, share it with a leader friend who is in the trenches right now. Um, if you are brave, maybe with your boss. Just kidding. But thank you so much, listeners. Once again, this is BizBlend with Sana. I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you.